their work complete, are headed back to the lab.
Testing. 1, 2.
Diane, it's 4:28 a.m.
You should have something for us now.
Hello YouTube, Sandre here. You may remember my video, Is Taxation Theft? Or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Wooden Huts. If you haven't seen that video, I suggest you do. The link is in the description. In that video, I mentioned how I had this discussion with a few individuals in a Discord server about taxation. They argued that it was theft, yada yada yada. Well, during that conversation, we also covered another topic that I want to make a quick video about. They mentioned how men and women vote differently, and they suggested that men and women are simply just biologically more inclined to vote right or left, depending on their gender. Now, I'm not going to dive into the biology of the differences between men and women because, well, that's pretty much settled at this point. I'm sorry if I'm going to offend anyone who believes that gender is a social construct, but it very much isn't. There are innate differences between men and women, not just in terms of their physiology, but also in terms of their neurology and psychology. However, as you will see in this video, I can't really find any justification for the claim that the difference in voting habits between men and women in the Western world, and especially in the US, has to do with the psychological innate differences between men and women. It is true that if you look at the presidential elections in the US, you do find a considerable gap between men and women. The statistical difference between women voting Democrat and men voting Republican is statistically significant. There's just one problem though. Let's zoom out a bit. Yeah, pretty much regardless of the nation in the Western world that I look at, I notice the same thing over and over again. Yes, there is generally some kind of gender gap between how likely men and women are to vote right or left in general elections. However, in almost all of these nations, the US included, this is historically speaking a very recent phenomena. And as you will see, the explanation for these differences in voting habits probably have nothing to do with the actual biological, neurological, and psychological differences between men and women. Or if it does have anything to do with that, it would only account for a very small difference, and not the big difference that you actually see here. But anyway, what I see regardless of the nation is that somewhere around the 80s, or in the US, shortly before the 80s, you start to see a divide between men and women. Now, of course, if you go even further back than the 70s, yeah, from election to election, there is a bit of a difference between men and women too, but the difference is far smaller than what you're seeing here, and also, it's not as if women consistently vote more left-wing than men either. It seems to be kind of 50-50. Like I said, you see the same kind of trend in most other Western nations. Somewhere during the 80s, women start to vote a bit more left-wing and men start to vote a bit more right-wing. Now, this alone should tell you that the innate gender differences probably have nothing to do with the voting habits of men and women, because then you would probably see this kind of divide even earlier. Unless you want to argue that there's some kind of weird mutation in the neurology of men and women that just wasn't around before the 1980s. So why do men and women differ in their voting habits between the parties in this modern era? Now, one claim that I hear from people arguing this kind of position, you know, that women are more naturally inclined to vote left, is that it has to do with abortion. Women are, they argue, more likely to be in favor of abortion than men. Well, I'm about to piss those people off, as well as any feminist watching, because feminists usually argue that women en masse support abortion, but that's simply not true. When you have large surveys looking at Americans' views, for instance, men and women really don't differ that much on abortion rights, and when they do, women are actually a bit more likely than men to oppose legal abortion. So being pro-choice is actually not more common among women than men. However, one political issue that keeps rearing its head when I look at any kind of research into why the gender gap exists between men and women's voting habits ever since the 1980s. And that is the difference between men and women in regards to how much they want to support government programs. In the US, for instance, when it comes to the difference between men and women regarding how they support governmental programs such as healthcare and education, there is about an 8-point difference between the genders. Now, why could this possibly be? Why could it be that women are a bit more inclined than men to support these governmental programs? I'm gonna give you 10 seconds to think about it. Time's up. The correct answer is more women than men work in the public sector, especially in fields such as healthcare and education. In other words, this just seems like another case of people voting after their interest. This would also largely explain why the gap between men and women is a fairly recent phenomenon. As female voters may have discovered over time, ever since a lot of these reforms were implemented in the late 60s and early 70s, that the right-wing parties generally don't tend to fund social programs. You see, workers tend to vote for the party that they think won't take their job away. And historically speaking, the Democratic Party in the US has been the party that has funded social programs the most, or at least not defunded them as much as the Republican Party. Hence, you see the difference in voting. By the way, before I end this video, let me tell you something I heard from a friend regarding YouTube's new settings. As always, I want to urge you to subscribe to this channel and follow me on social media, but please also click the bell. Thing is, I've heard that now you have to click it twice apparently, just to make sure. YouTube keeps changing their shit and it's confusing as fuck, I know. But if you click that bell, you will increase the odds of actually being notified when I drop a new video. The next video will drop on Sunday. I will see you then. Bye!